Have you ever had anyone tell you that you need to love God? I want to have a discussion with you today about this idea of needing to love God. You see, this popular idea is often heard when referring to Christian living and the Christian life, and is used usually in an attempt to conjure up some kind of reciprocal love for God. You should love God more. You need to love God more. And when a person is trapped in legalism, with the burden of religion weighing them down, this idea that you need to love God becomes very heavy, becomes very burdensome, and it causes people to be introspective and focused on their own ability to love. Am I loving God enough? Is there something I can do to love God more? Maybe He wants me to love Him by doing this or saying this or reading so many hours of Scripture per day, whatever it is. And they get all focused on their own ability to love and whether they're loving God rightly or loving Him enough, rather than focusing on the real root of the issue, which is actually God's love for them. You see, I've spoken with a great number of people, and I've also been one in the past who were so consumed with trying to love God that they completely missed the point of His love for them. I missed His love for me for many, many years. And in reality, the only way that we can truly love God at all is by receiving His love for us in the first place. So in this study today, we're going to be exploring this topic of how to truly love God and what that actually means. Not by trying to love harder or love more, but by receiving His love for you. Join me today because this is going to open your perspective to something that's vital to a real relationship with God. Hi, I'm Jim. I'd like to welcome you to Thriving Branch today as we explore this topic of loving God and how to actually love God, because it may not be in the way that you're expecting. It may not be in the way that you've believed or have been taught your entire life. It certainly isn't that way for me. The way I was taught to love God was through my performance, through my obedience, through how many hours I spent at church, or how much my tithe check was, or how many hours I was reading my Bible. All those things were lumped into this idea of performance-based love, that I needed to love God by doing these things. And furthermore, the typical religious idea is that we need to love God first. How many times have you heard that? We need to love God first in order to receive anything from Him. In order to have any real, meaningful relationship with Him, we have to love God first. And that sounds right. It sounds very righteous because it's taught in so many ways, in so many different places within Christianity. But it's actually man-centered. That's actually a self-focused idea that places the burden on people to perform and tells them that unless they perform properly first, then they'll never have any real relationship with God. They won't have any meaningful relationship with God. And they'll never receive any help or love from God. That's religious legalism at its finest. And it keeps many people in bondage and cuts off their source of real strength and help. Because the truth of the matter is, my friend, we have no power to perform at all apart from God. Did you hear what I just said? We have no power to perform at all apart from God. We have to start from that place of reality. The scriptures are quite clear that we cannot love God first, because God already loved us first, even before we knew who he was, let alone loved him back. God loved us before we ever loved him, before we even recognized him, before we even knew who he was. God loved us first. Take, for example, one of the most famous stories in all of Scripture, the story of the Prodigal Son. Some of you may already know this story. Some of you may already be familiar with this story. And most people do. Most people know the basic details of this story already. But there's one detail in particular, my friend, regarding the love of God towards us in relation to our love for him. I want you to see this with me. So let's read the story of the prodigal son, which is found in Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 32. I want you to read this with me. Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 32. There's something very interesting that we're going to see here. Ready? 1, 2, read. And he said, that's Jesus, and he said, a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. And he divided them to his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in the land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his belly with the husks that the swine did eat, and no man gave to him. And when he came to himself, he said, How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and am no more worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father, but when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him, and had compassion, and ran, and fell on his neck, and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no more worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring forth the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet. And bring here the fatted calf, and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found. And they began to be merry. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants, and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother is come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him safe and sound. And he was angry, and he would not go in. And therefore came his father out and entreated him. And he answering said to his father, See, these many years do I serve you, neither transgressed I at any time your commandment. And yet you never gave me a kid that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this, your son was come, which has devoured your living with harlots, you have killed for him the fatted calf. And he said to him, Son, you are ever with me, and all that I have is yours. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. Now I know we read a large portion of scripture there. That was the account of the prodigal son, the story of the prodigal son. But the interesting point here that people sometimes miss is found in verse 17. Take notice of this, because this will show you something amazing and wonderful about the love of God and his character that many people need to see. In verse 17, the son reasons to himself, Why should I be starving when my father's house has plenty of food? Then he decides to go back to his father and rehearses an apology speech. Do you see it? Do you see what's actually happening here? The son is not returning to his father because he loves his dad. No. The son is returning because he's hungry. Catch this, my friend. Don't let this slip away. The son's motivation to return home is not love. It's hunger. It's need. It's desire to eat. But even so, the father still accepts his son back with rejoicing. We can see in verse 20, the father is looking. The father is waiting. The father is noticing his son from far away, which tells us that the father was watching and waiting for his son to come home. The father ran to meet his son, not to punish him or to ridicule him, but to hug and kiss his son and welcome his son back home. In verse 22, the father doesn't even let his son finish his rehearsed apology speech, but he gives his son not only a replacement robe, but the best robe. And he also puts a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And in verse 23, they kill the fatted calf and have a party. All of these things represent an aspect of Jesus' redemption. For example, his righteousness, his authority and his position, his possession and protection from the dust of the ground, his provision and his joy. All of it represents an aspect of Jesus and his redemptive work for you. The key here for our study today, though, is recognizing that the Father gave his returning Son all of these blessings, not based on the Son's love for his Father, but based on the Father's unconditional love for his Son. Did you hear that? The Father gave his Son all of these blessings, not based on the Son's love for the Father, but the Father's unconditional love for his Son. This gives us insight into the character of God and what he actually expects from us. Nothing. God expects nothing from us except to come to him. And this is why the lie of religion that we must love God first and clean ourselves up first is so damaging, because it stops people from simply coming to God to receive his love and be cleaned up by him. I encourage you today, my friend, to receive this truth. I encourage you to stop trying to love God and to start receiving his unconditional love for you. You'll be amazed at the life-changing effects that this has, of simply resting in his love, free from the burden of religious performance. As 1 John chapter 4, verse 19 says, we love because he first loved us. It is his love for us that enables us to have any capacity to love. That statement is devastating to our human pride, I know, but nevertheless, it's absolutely true. We have no capacity to truly love in the divine sense of the word without receiving God's love. Receive his love for you, my friend, and be blessed. Again, you'll be amazed at the life-changing effects that this actually has for you. I'll see you again next week. Thank you for joining me for today's Bible study. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with others. And be sure to subscribe if you haven't already done so that you never miss a video. I also want to encourage you to check out ThrivingBranch.com, where you will find out a lot more information and resources on the gospel of Jesus Christ. I also want to let you know that you can help support me in this ministry through your prayers, your sharing of the information with others, and through your financial giving. You can make a direct donation through the website using PayPal, or by subscribing on Patreon, or by purchasing some of our t-shirts and accessories from our online store. Regardless of which way you choose, I want to let you know that every single prayer, every single subscription, and every single donation is appreciated and really does help me in this ministry. I want to thank you again for your continued support, and be blessed.